Hello there, everybody. This is Terry Cole. This is my second video for November 2024 about living with Salesforce flows. If you're interested, the first one covered some things to do on the control side, if you will, in the settings page to live with the list view and its properties a little better. This one is going to cover some odd tricks for living with flow in the editor. The editor has a number of pretty significant deficiencies, and I don't think they're going to get corrected anytime soon. So these are some things that I do to try to make my multi-year work sustainable. I'm a lone wolf, but I think of myself, teaming with my 3-year-old guy self who's already forgotten everything he did 3 years ago. And there's a number of requirements to get going quickly into production. And my future self, who is 3 years from now, who wants to extend and make these functions even more useful, and is going to have to go back and figure out what we all did. And so, even though I'm a lone wolf, I think of myself as working with 3 people, and that has driven me to these practices that I'm going to show you. So you can like them or hate them, take them with a grain of salt, but here we go. Let me show you let me get rid of the talking head and I'll show you what we're going to talk about, and we'll go from there. Let's see, I want no talking head. Hello, how do I get rid of talking head? That wasn't quite it. There we go. Nope. Here it is. Sorry about that. All right, so here I am in the flow editor. My first note is, first of all, use lots of text templates. We need to string together text in a number of ways, and frankly, you have a number of ways to do it. There are those who believe you should only do it with assignment statements. Sequential assignment statements didn't used to even guarantee they execute in the order shown on the screen. I think they do now, so technically you can assemble a string block by doing multiple series assignments within one assignment element to assign the first word and concatenate a space and concatenate another variable and concatenate a space and concatenate some more information. But it's really hard to do, and it's really hard to read. And we have this thing called a text template instead to really help us out and use them. So here is a very, very simple example of a text template. I needed a link to email the owner. I wanted to be rich text because I was going to put it on a screen that needed to have separation and everything. So I created a template, and I'm pulling in the variable from a resource, and then I put the rest of the code here, just typed it in. I can format it if I wanted to. I can do a number of things with it, and it's just right there. I'm not trying to read concatenation formulas. I'm not trying to ferret it out. The only thing is it's a little indirect, in that this text template is used as a resource and shown on the screen rather than, and you can't actually do the formula on the screen anyway, so you got to do something like this. So use text templates to your advantage. But there's another really interesting thing you can do with text templates, and that's make yourself notes. So here I've made a text template that's a very strange named implementation plan, filling in missing info. And so, let's just pretend this is the implementation plan for the whole thing. And you could do some clever things like, put doc, in front of it so that they all sort together or something if you want. And describe how this block is meant to do. It gets the service, fills in missing information, shows the screen on the community page or lightning page with some buttons, then processes whatever buttons are clicked. That's what this flow does, and I've got it now in an element that I can refer to later. I can make myself notes about to-do items. I can make myself notes about testing plan. I can put them all in one template if I want. I don't ever have to use the template, and I don't think it has much of a performance issue. If this is your most used flow, record triggered by every single record in your whole flow, I would not do that because you don't know what performance impact it might have, but I think it's very, very minor. I imagine it is drug along every time it's implemented, but there's so much overhead in flow. It's far less than Process Builder, but it's still a fair amount of overhead, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But use templates to write notes to yourself, and use templates to simplify stringing together code and formatting strings that you're going to show on a screen. Send in an email or put on the screen or assign to a rich, complex text field on a record. So that's my first tip. So here's where we are using text templates for concatenation. And remember, you can't do conditionals, you can't do formulas. And use them for notes for you and your team, requirements, implementation, to-do lists, test plans. Okay, now, second thing we're going to talk about is using fake blocks. They can be fake decisions or fake assignments. Those are the only two things that I could really know that you can make fake blocks out of. I suppose you could create a null apex and make a fake block out of it. Why would you do that? Well, first of all, a fake assignment lets you put in a square element, give it a name, and give it some descriptions, which you can now show on the screen by a hover, that you can read as you're editing and trying to figure out what does this piece of code do. That's fine. I'm going to show you, I'm a fan of using a fake decision, and let me show you why. A fake decision looks like this. So I have a fake decision surrounding this block. I've called the fake decision block. I even put a web wingding in it. Those work. And it's fill in the missing information. And I've described what it does in the description of this fake decision so that I can hover over it and I can see it. And what happens now is I've got this triangular mark. I wish I could change its color or something, but Salesforce doesn't allow that. I've got this triangular mark, and then I've got more or less a square here that surrounds all the code that we're talking about. And you can tell from the way it all works that this block is not included. This is the beginning of something else. So I've got this fake, and it always goes this way. It never goes this way. And I just constructed it by, making a decision that will always be true. So always is going to always be true. And, that can be, you can do that a lot of ways. You can set a variable to false and say, false equals true, or you can do something I did here. My implementation note that's a template does not equal, never. That's, always going to be true. And so you can do it. You can give yourself an always condition in a lot of ways, but it lets you isolate this code. Now, why might you want to isolate the code? One, for documentation. You cannot print out flows as far as I know. And so you're going to have to rely on screenshots to document your flows, and you want to take screenshots of whole blocks. And so it's kind of nice to have a whole block. This is how I would do my screenshot. Now I would hit my screenshot. I've got the whole block and the note up, and I can highlight that and say, there's my block. And then I can go down here, and if that's my block, then I might just do a screenshot of this. And then here's my last block, and I might do a screenshot of just this last block. And now I have documentation of this whole flow as 3 blocks. Okay? So that's one reason you might. The other reason is, say you're debugging this and you need to turn off this code. Well, you can change your decision to go to the other path always temporarily and skip this whole block of code. Or let's say you're debugging it and you've isolated it down to the point you think this flow would run right if you just got rid of, this piece of code. And you can delete it, right? But there's no way to put it back once you've saved it, except go back to an old version. So, you can manipulate the version system to go back, but you can also insert a fake decision right here. Let's add it, decision, disable. And let's say the first outcome is skip. And I'm gonna use my record ID is always set in this thing for it to work. Record ID is equals or is null false. So this is always going to be true. And so, and let's put always on this because for right now I'm disabled. I've disabled the code. I'm skipping the code and I've disabled it. And so that's what I'm going to do. So now I'm going to close this box and look, I have this fake decision sitting there, but nothing's been surrounded. What I need to do for skipping it, it connects to the right block, but for disabling it, I need to connect this disable side to the next element that I would go to if I were going to skip whatever. And I can do this for one piece of element like I'm doing here, or a whole block of code. So I'm going to connect it to right there. And now watch what happens. It redraws it all, and magically the code that I want to disable is right in there. That's awesome. And so now I can run this and I'd be skipping this piece. And when I've got that all working, I can turn it back on. And when I'm completely done with it, I can actually delete it by hit delete element. And what do I want to keep? I want to keep my skip path. And lo and behold, it's all back. Exactly the way I wanted it. Nothing's been changed. The editor did the work for me of adding my sort of breakpoints or skip around points. So maybe I want to conditionally disable a piece of code temporarily or permanently. Another reason I might do that is for the reason I might want to delete the whole block of code. Let's go back. Let's say I want to delete a complex block of code. So I do what I've done here. I insert my fake block. I connect it so it goes around the whole block. And now, instead of deleting the element and saving one of the paths, I say, nope, I want to delete it all. It's going to delete the element. It's going to delete all the elements in there. Notice we do not have a block delete command. I can delete blocks, but I have to do it one at a time. So one block after another if I want to delete. But elements have the special thing. If I want to delete this, I can say delete this element, and I can say delete all the paths, and boom, they're all gone. Undo works well too, thank heavens. So I can undo that. I can undo that. I can undo that and undo that, and I'm back to my original flow. Okay? But maybe, so it's inserting these fake elements is a poor person's mass delete or block delete also. So that's why you might want to use fake blocks for blocking the code for documentation. And you can create these fake blocks of code at the very beginning as placeholders. And you can keep them there the whole time as debug and for turning things on and off during debug, or even for emergency patches. I'm just going to turn off this code. I don't want to touch anything else because I don't want to mess anything up. Because I'm doing it in production as a patch, perhaps. We'll come back and clean it up, in our sandbox, and then release it in the next major release. And then as a poor person's mass delete. Okay, the next topic is messy, but it recently happened to me, and I realized that I've found a better systematic approach to refactoring code. Salesforce has not deemed it wonderful to give us a block copy. I can select all these I want, but I cannot paste them in another flow. I can actually mass select all these items. And I can copy them, but I cannot go to another flow and paste them anywhere else. And so it's just the way it is. And so what I need is a way to copy things into another flow so that I can refactor it. Let's say, as an example, that I have decided that this code, get the rate, make the decision, and come back. This code is needed in 3 other flows. Well, I can create a brand new subflow manually, but that's prone to me making errors and having to recreate all the variables and the fields, the formula and the templates, and fill in all the elements correctly. So instead, what I'm going to do is save as a new flow. Okay. And then I'm going to start deleting everything that I don't want and make it work. And then I'm going to hope it's what I wanted. but I have a better way to do it. So first, mark out the block that you want by putting a fake decision around it. Then create variables that you're going to need for your new subflow anyway. So this new subflow is going to, it can get this on its own. This decision is based on having a record in memory. So I'm going to create myself a record that is called, I'm going to create myself a record variable that's a subservice record, because this, and this all operate on that subsurface record that was gotten way back up here. And I'm going to have to pass that down into the flow so that the subflow can read it and modify it and pass it back up. And so, and we don't save it, so I can't use the database to pass it. So I'm going to have to pass by copy. And so I'm going to create a subservice record, and I'm going to mark it as an input, okay? And that seems strange to have an unused input in your flow, but remember, our whole goal is to isolate this block of code so that when we copy the whole thing to a new subflow, we can delete everything we don't want and have a working copy. So what we want to do first is not only isolate the elements that we want, but isolate the variables that we're going to need. So I'm going to go ahead and create this input that's a record, and then I'm going to go into our decision, and where it uses the get subservice thing, instead of that, I'm going to replace it. It's if the hours equivalent is null on the subservice. Instead, I'm going to use the subservice record that I created, and I'm going to, what was it? Hour equivalent is null. I'm going to, and unfortunately it got rid of it, but I'm going to have to recreate it. Is null true? All right, so I have to recreate each line. Everywhere I used a variable that's going to be deleted when I delete code, I have to patch it up by instead using subservice record, right? Okay, so I'm going to replace that one and that one. And what's really interesting is I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do it in these elements also. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, I can make an assignment here to copy the things that I care about from the record that I got onto the record that I'm going to be receiving so that these work right. And then I can add another assignment right here to copy the outputs that I'm going to be receiving from what's eventually going to be the subflow to my parent flow. And I can debug this and make sure this is 100% functional with all the changes I made in my original code before I ever do anything. So I'm going to have an assignment right here to copy over the hours equivalent and anything else that's needed. And I'm going to copy out the price that I set and anything else that's needed, the link. So we're setting the price, setting the hours, and the link. So right here, I'm going to add an assignment that takes the record price, link, and hours and puts it back on the original parent record so that the rest of my flow can run right. And so what I'm really doing is emulating the subflow that I'm going to isolate in my parent flow so that it works right. And that sounds like it ought to work, but it's work you're going to have to do anyway. And this comes with its own test vehicle, right? I get it all working. Then I save as a new version. I save as a new flow, save as new flow. I, give it a label. I do all this, right? And it's going to save it away. And now what I have to do is begin deleting that which is not what I need. And notice if I try to delete this, I can't because I'm using it all over the place. Okay, so I got to delete other things first. And I'm going to keep this block. And I'm going to start deleting. I'm going to see if I can delete all of this. I think I can probably delete that element and get rid of all of it. And I can delete this element and get rid of all of it. And so now my subflow is correct except for the beginning here. And anything that's left is something I didn't properly isolate in my original parent flow. So if I try to delete this element, I'm still going to have some things that are used. Set hour is still using this because I didn't finish the job of isolating my variables properly. Set link is it. There's a decision. These decisions are missing it. And then I have some functions that are also using that. So in my original parent, I would have to properly isolate this. I would have dealt with all of this, but it's work I will have to do when I go back to my original and put this subflow in it anyway. So that's my poor man's block copy so that you can refactor to subflows. I have no poor person's block copy from one flow to another. I don't think anyone does. Hope it's coming. So isolate the subflow first by assigning variables marked as input before your subflow target block. Use the new variables in the element, including formats, templates, decisions, assignments. Make it work in the original as is using your debugger. This will save you so much time. Then copy the flow and surgically delete everything else, and you might find a couple things escaped your notice. Make note of those because you're going to have to go back to your parent flow and make those changes anyway. Then clean up your subflow, all the extra variables, because once I deleted all that stuff, if I actually look at all of my resources, I will now have a bunch of things that aren't used. This print email is not used anywhere, so I can delete it. This button label is not used anywhere in this subflow because it was used on the screen. I can delete it. So you'll go through all of these elements that are in your subflow copy because you're refactoring it. You'll just delete everything that's unused and clean it up. And, there's plenty of things that are still used. Record ID won't be used because you're passing in the record. Set hours will be used. These assignments are used, obviously, but it's mostly these formulas and these text templates won't be used either. So you're going to clean that all up in your subflow, save it, then go back to your parent and delete. It's scary, but you're going to delete in your parent flow the code that you isolated, and you're going to replace it with your subflow and pass in the variables and pass out your output, and it should work because you already debugged it to work with your isolated temporary variables. All right, so that's my advice. You can take it or leave it. Refactoring is not for the faint of heart. Creating subflows is very important. It allows you to not repeat yourself because we are literally going to use this code in 4 other flows, and it's an hour's work to recreate it, and you don't have to do it. It takes about 15 minutes to. Usually, you don't have that many inputs to a piece of code that you're reusing. That's why you're reusing it. It's kind of modular in some way or another. So you've got a few inputs, a few outputs. You can add those to your parent flow, isolate them, then copy the whole darn thing, delete it, clean up the unused variables. It's a mechanical process. It's lots of clicking. I wish there were a better way, but I don't know of a better way. Perhaps somebody will give us some tools eventually for it to remove unused resources, but then put it in your parent and prove it works. Now you have a working subflow. You have a built-in test harness because it worked in your original flow. Now you can go put it in other flows knowing it works and you're all set. And that sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but I think your team of past self and future self will agree that having one copy of complex code that takes an hour to enter is way better than having 4 copies of complex code that takes an hour to enter and now causes untold amounts of errors in trying to maintain 4 copies of the same code. So thanks for listening. I look forward to whenever we don't have to worry about block delete and block copy being a hack in Salesforce Flow. Thanks much. Bye.